The Calusa were a Native American tribe that lived on the southwest coast of Florida. The civilization of the Calusa evolved from that of the prehistoric inhabitants of the Everglades. The region has been inhabited for thousands of years by earlier indigenous tribes. The historic Calusa were members of the Caloosahatchee civilization during the 16th and 17th centuries, when Europeans first came into contact with them. Instead of farming, they created a sophisticated society centered on estuarine fisheries. Their domain extended at least from Charlotte Harbor to Marco Island, and their main city, Calusa, was most likely located at Mound Key. The Calusa realm spread from Tanpa, at the mouth of Charlotte Harbor, down the coast to Muspa, at the southern end of Marco Island, and inland to Guacata on Lake Miami, Lake Okeechobee, according to Hernando de Escalante Fontaneda, a Spaniard who was captured by Florida Indians between 1545 and 1566. Although estimates of the overall population at the time of European contact varied from 10,000 to many times that, they possessed the densest population of South Florida. Other tribes in southern Florida, such as the Tequesta and Yega on the southeast coast of the peninsula, and the Miami surrounding Lake Okeechobee, were also subject to Calusa political power and authority. The Ayayas tribe on Florida's central east coast could have also been influenced by Calusa. They went extinct as a result of sickness and violence brought on by European contact. The tribe, its major town, and its leader were referred to as Calos, Calus, Cayalus, and Carlos in early Spanish and French texts. Calusa means fierce people in their language, according to Hernando de Escalante Fontaneda, a Spaniard who was captured by the Calusa in the 16th century. By the early 1800s, the local Anglo-American population referred to them as Calusa. The ethnonyms of the people who once inhabited the area around the Caloosahatchee River, also from the Creek language, are Mskoke and Miccosukee, which are the languages of the modern Seminole and Miccosukee nations. While noting that the chief's name was Carlos, Juan Rogel, a Jesuit missionary to the Calusa in the late 1560s, reported that the kingdom was called Escampaba with an alternate spelling of Escampaha. Rogel said that the Spanish had altered the chief's name from Calus to Carlos. Marquard cites a 1570s statement that states, "The Bay of Carlos," in the Indian language, is called Escampaba for the cacique of this town, who afterward called himself Carlos in devotion to the emperor, Charles V, Holy Roman Emperor. Escampaba could be connected to a location called Stapaba that was noted on a map from the early 16th century. It was at least 12,000 years ago when Paleo-Indians arrived in what is now Florida. People began residing in settlements close to marshes about 5000 BC. Preferential locations were probably occupied for several generations. By around 3000 BC, the sea had risen nearly to its current level, and Florida's climate had stabilized. Both fresh and saltwater marshes were frequently inhabited by humans. They built up enormous shell middens during this time because they were dependent on shellfish. Large communities with ceremonial earthwork mounds, like those on Horse Island, were home to many people. By the year 2000 BC, pottery was being fired in Florida. The archaic civilization, which had been fairly consistent throughout Florida, began to change into more different regional cultures from 500 BC. Some archaic artifacts, including one site categorized as early archaic and dating before 5000 BC, have been discovered in the area where the Calusa later occupied. Prior to 3500 BC, there is proof that the humans heavily used the aquatic resources in Charlotte Harbor. Around 500 BC, the area saw the appearance of early Glades culture pottery that was not ornamented. The Caloosahatchee culture began approximately AD 500, when pottery different from the Glades style emerged in the area. This includes the ancient Calusa people and continued until around 1750. A sophisticated civilization with dense populations had emerged by 880. The emergence of pottery from different traditions in the archaeological record defines later stages of the Caloosahatchee civilization. Approximately encompassing what are now Charlotte and Lee counties, the Caloosahatchee civilization lived on the west coast of Florida from Estro Bay to Charlotte Harbor and inland nearly halfway to Lake Okeechobee. The Caloosahatchee culture area was the center of the Calusa realm at the time of the first European encounter. During this time, fishing-related artifacts underwent gradual change. There were no clear pauses in custom that would suggest population replacement. Belle Glade plain pottery supplanted the sand-tempered, undecorated pottery that had been prevalent in the region between 500 and 1000. Originally found inland near Lake Okeechobee, this was formed from clay that included spicules from freshwater sponges, spongilla. The migration of people from the interior to the coastal region may have caused this transformation, or it may have been influenced by trade and culture. Following this, there was minimal alteration to the pottery heritage. Before European contact, the Calusa were descended from people who had been in the region for at least 1,000 years, if not longer. In Spanish, commoners and nobles were the two tiers of the Calusa society. Studies indicate that the Calusa employed prisoners for labor or perhaps sacrifice, even though there is no proof that they had organized slavery. The tribe was controlled by a small number of leaders. The work of most of the Calusa was used to sustain them. King or supreme chief, a military leader, capitan general in Spanish, and a chief priest were among the leaders. Mound Key, close to modern-day Estero, Florida, served as the Calusa's capital and the seat of government. According to a 1566 eyewitness report, there was a king's house on Mound Key big enough for 2,000 people to stand inside. According to a Spanish account from 1564, the military captain was the chief's cousin, and the priest was his father. The majority of names were recorded in Spanish by the Spanish, who documented 4 instances of recognized succession to the paramount chief post. His son Carlos succeeded Cinquain, who in turn succeeded his brother, name unknown. Felipe, Carlos's cousin and brother-in-law, replaced Carlos, and Pedro, another Carlos relative, succeeded Felipe. According to the Spanish, it was anticipated that the chief would marry his sister. According to modern archaeologists McMahon and Marquardt, this sentence could have been misinterpreted as a mandate to wed a clan sister. Additionally, the leader wed ladies from allied tribes and subordinate towns. In 1566, Carlos proposed to Spanish adventurer Pedro Menendez de Avilés for his sister Antonia, demonstrating the use of weddings to forge alliances. The main food source for the Calusa at their coastal and estuarine communities was fish, namely hardhead catfish, Eriopsis phellis, pigfish, redmouth grunt, and pinfish, Lagodon rhomboids. Larger bony fish, sharks, rays, mollusks, crabs, ducks, sea and land turtles, and other terrestrial animals were used to complement these little fish. The Calusa provided the Spanish with just fish and oysters during Pedro Menendez de Avilés' visit in 1566. More than 93% of the animal energy in the diet came from fish and shellfish, less than 6% from mammals, and less than 1% from birds and reptiles, according to an examination of faunal remains at one coastal habitation site, the Whiteman site on Sanibel Island. On the other hand, fish supplied somewhat less than 20% of the energy from animal flesh in an inland location, Platte Island, whereas mammals, mostly deer, contributed over 60%. Although some authors contend that the Calusa grew maize and Zamia integrifolia, Kuanti for sustenance, Widmer contends that the evidence supporting the Calusa's cultivation of maize rests on the now disregarded claim that the Narvaez and DeSoto expeditions landed in Charlotte Harbor rather than Tampa Bay. Zamia does not grow in the marshes that comprise the majority of the Calusa ecosystem, and no Zamia pollen has been discovered at any Calusa-related site. According to Marquardt, the Calusa declined the Spanish gift of farming implements, claiming they were unnecessary. The Calusa gathered a variety of wild berries, fruits, nuts, roots, and other plant components. George Murdoch estimated that only around 20% of the Calusa's diet was made up of wild plants they collected, according to Widmer. Archaeological excavations on Sanibel Island and Usepa Island have shown evidence that the Calusa did, in fact, eat wild plants such as cabbage palm, prickly pear, hog plum, acorns, wild papaya, and chili peppers, despite the fact that no trace of plant food was discovered at the Whiteman site. Additionally, there is evidence that the Calusa grew bottle gourds and cucurbita, pepo gourds as early as 2,000 years ago, which were used for dippers and net floats. The Calusa used nets to catch the majority of their fish. To capture the most plentiful and practical fish, Nets with varying mesh sizes were employed annually. Nets were constructed with a standard mesh size. In order to weave nets, the Calusa created gauges out of bone and shell. Mollusk shells were utilized to make sinkers and net weights, while farmed gourds were employed as net floats. To capture fish, the Calusa also employed net gorges, hooks, and spears. On the land of the nearby Muspa tribe in Key Marco, well-preserved nets, net floats, and hooks were discovered. Hammering and pounding instruments were made from wood and mollusk shells. Shark teeth and mollusk shells were used for engraving, carving, cutting, and grading. The Calusa used rope made of palm fiber to weave nets. Additionally, Spanish moss, fake sisal, agave decipiens, saw palmetto trunks, cabbage palm fronds, and the bark of willow and cypress trees were used to make cord. The Calusa also used wood and string to make fish corrals, weirs, and traps. A nicely carved deer head, bowls, ear ornaments, masks, plaques, and ornamental standards are among the wood artifacts discovered. Frequently, the plaques and other items were painted. Although no Calusa dugout canoe has been discovered to yet, other Florida tribes may have built similar boats made of pine or cypress. Using sturdy shell tools, the boat was shaped by first burning the center and then cutting and removing the charred center. While excavating for a middle school in Marathon, Florida in 1954, a dugout boat was discovered. The canoe, which is currently on display at the Crane Point Museum and Nature Center in Marathon and is believed to be the Calusa, was not preserved and is in bad condition. Large two-story communal homes were the Calusa's dwellings. The chief's house was also used as the council house, as Pedro Menendez de Avilés noted when he visited the capital in 1566, saying it could accommodate 2,000 people without being crowded. The chief sat on an elevated seat with 500 of his principal men, and his sister wife sat on another raised seat with 500 ladies as Menendez was properly greeted in his home. It was implied that the chief's home had walls because it was said to have 2 large windows. In the 1697, 5 friars who slept at the chief's home grumbled because the roof allowed dew, sun, and rain to enter. On top of earthen mounds, the chief's home and maybe the other homes at Calos were constructed. The Spanish recorded 16 dwellings in the 1,000-person Calusa city of Calos in a 1697 report. The Calusa wore very little. The males wore breechcloths made of deerskin. The clothing of Calusa women was not as well described by the Spanish. The majority of Florida's indigenous women wore skirts woven from Spanish moss during the time. The Calusa did not tattoo themselves, although they frequently painted their bodies. The males had lengthy hair. When a Calusa man converted to Christianity, the missionaries understood that it would be a significant sacrifice to have his hair trimmed in the European way. The Calusa were not known to wear jewelry or other ornaments. The chief's wife was said to have gold beads, pearls, and precious stones around her neck when Menendez de Avilés visited in 1566. The chief's successor wore beads on his knees and a gold jewelry on his forehead. The Spanish who first visited the Calusa have previously described ceremonial or other creative masks that have been found. Some of these masks had hinges and pull strings as movable pieces, allowing the wearer to change the mask's appearance while donning it. The Calusa held that humans had 3 souls, that 3 supernatural entities dominated the earth, and that after death, souls moved to animals. The strongest leader oversaw the physical world, the second most powerful headed human governments, and the final one assisted in deciding which side would prevail in conflicts. The 3 souls, according to the Calusa, were a person's reflection, shadow, and pupil. At the cemetery, the Calusa would confer with the soul in the pupil of the eye, which remained with the body after death. Following death, the other 2 spirits departed from the body and transformed into an animal. The spirit would go to a weaker animal and finally become nothing if a Calusa murdered such an animal. Priests and singing ladies participated in processions during Calusa festivities. At other times, the carved masks that the priests wore were displayed on the temple walls. For 4 months at a period, sorcerers in the shape of the devil, with some horns on their heads, according to early Calusa historian Hernando de Escalante Fontaneda, went around the town howling like animals. Despite Spanish efforts to convert the Calusa to Catholicism, they stayed true to their beliefs. Since the nobles constituted a bridge between the gods and the populace, their status and authority were closely linked to the belief system, which contributed to their resistance to conversion. The foundation of their legitimacy and power would have been undermined by conversion. For about 200 years, the Calusa fought against the Spanish in their missionaries' attempts to convert them spiritually and physically. Early in the 18th century, the tribe was wiped off by Creek and Yamasee raids after being decimated by sickness. The Calusa buried their deceased in mounds, according to evidence. A body was either left in a charnel house to allow the flesh to slip away on its own after death, or occasionally a medicine man with long fingernails would scrape the flesh away from the bone. The bones were then collected, put in a basket, and interred in a mound. Because the Calusa congregated atop these mounds on holy days to sacrifice aromatic plants and honey, they were used for both religious rites and funerals.